Okay, this is the second part of tonight. I'm starting assignment E, but I went back, just so I have this on recording here. I went back to the handout from D, and I said I'm going to place the extra credit part of this, that door there, and I made it a 32 by 80 instead of 32 by 84, which I had on the handout, because I wanted to place that so we can see when we place our pipe columns and our beam, that the beam is going to encroach into the head height of that door, depending on which choice you choose for how you frame the beam. And I'm actually going to give you a choice. So I'll talk about that. Let's start with page 1, which says create the column grids here. So we're going to be in the work level 0 existing architectural plan. And I'm going to go ahead and hide these section marks. I'm going to select one and do the VH shortcut to hide them, just so they don't get in my way. And since I'm done with these dimensions in this working plan, I'm going to delete them, but you don't have to. I'm just trying to kind of clear the deck so I can see what I'm doing. Actually, it probably would have been better to leave them there, because when you turn it in and you want to get your extra credit, at least the exterior, I want to leave the interior ones. I can delete the exterior.
You can just hide them in view and unhide them.
Yeah, I could. But I don't want to hide all dimensions because I'm going to want to use dimensions to place my column grids. So I'm just going to leave them there. They're probably not going to get in my way. And I do want to hide these elevation marks, though, because the reason I like to hide those is because then I can zoom extents without having those way out in the distance. So we're going to pull up the view, and I said turn off the floor pattern, which will help. And so I'm going to go to VG for that. I look for floors, but I don't uncheck floors. I don't want to turn off floors. I just want to turn off the surface pattern. So on the row of floors, I come down under Projection Surface Patterns, override it, and uncheck Visible so that it's not showing up. Now we're ready to place our grids. And I didn't really go into a lot of detail on the handout on this, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So we can go to Home and Grid, but you'll also find it on Structure and Grid. And this button does the same thing whether you use it out of the Structure tab or the Home tab. By the way, just as kind of a preview, when you get to Revit 2013, they changed the word Home to Architecture. Because if you use Revit MEP or Revit Architecture or Revit Structure, if you have the combined version that you buy for 2013, they're all going to be built into one interface. They won't be 3 separate programs that you run. Whereas now, in 2012, you can go to Programs, Architecture, and there's Revit Structure and Revit Architecture. We didn't have them load Revit MEP this semester. So anyway, let's go to the Grid button. And when you place a column grid, it's very similar to placing a level. And typically, the first click is going to be a free end of the grid, and the second click is going to be the end that gets the bubble. So if I go ahead and look at the, I don't really have a finished handout, but this view right here on my assignment sheet shows what our grid should look like. So we're going to have 1 and 2, and then A and B. But I'm going to show you what I recommend doing. First of all, let's start with grid 1. Click one end, click the other end. Oops, I guess I didn't missed on it first. Yeah, I turned it on. Let me just double check. Yeah, she's gone. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I'm going to click, just kind of eyeballing it, and click the second point over here. And Revit's going to, normally it's going to assume that's grid 1 out of the box. Now, I think I have a 3/16 scale on my handout, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. No, it looks like I might have had an 8 scale. But I'm not going to grade based on which scale you have that view set up to when you turn it in. Now, I can either copy that grid or I can put a new one in. They'll work exactly the same way. So I'm just going to go back to grid and I'm going to slop the second one in, but I want to line up the endpoints, which you see you'll get the little blue dotted line, so that's pretty easy to do. Escape. So it said that's going to be 2. Now I'm going to run dimension string, just one continuous string from that face to that grid, to that grid, to that face, and I'm going to drop it down here And I'm going to escape and grab the bubbles and stretch them over like that. Notice when you're stretching the bubbles, and this is true for levels as well, you grab that little circle, and when you stretch one, it stretches the others that are lined up with it. If I want to pull the one further over than the two and the others, I can unlock that temporarily and pull it out separately. Then if I grab the other one and I move it over until it lines up again, it's relocked. And so that unlock is a temporary condition before you deselect it. Okay, so now we're going to start the, well, we got to get the dimensions right. So I'm going to select that one. This should be 10'4". This gives me a good chance to show the chasing the tail syndrome that you can fall into. If you change that to 10'4", and then without deselecting, go on and change that to 9'4", then you're chasing your tail back and forth because you're tweaking grid 1 up and down and up and down. So change, if you work your way down from the top to bottom or vice versa, we want to go 10'4", escape, then pick the other grid and go 9'4". That way we're not just chasing one back and forth. And now we've got 10'4", 9'4", 10'4", so those are correct. Now we start grid A, so we'll go back to grid, and I'm going to just click it down like this. And Revit calls it 3. So here's what I recommend, and this could be a much bigger building with more grids. When you switch from numbers to letters, don't put in B, C, D, E until you go back and renumber this one from a 3 to an A. When I put in the second one, whether I use the grid command or whether I copy it, either way, I'm just going to select and copy this time. When you copy that grid, it's going to call the next one B because Revit automatically increments it up one from the last one that you either placed or edited. Now I'm going to run my dimensions, DI. Wall to grid, to center line to grid, to wall. I don't really have to pick up that center line dimension because if I make these sides both 15, 9 1/4, they'll be centered around that reference plane because we're making those two dimensions equal. There we go. Now if you print this, because normally reference planes do not print, and you have a dimension attached to a reference plane, let's go to print preview here, which is under the purple R. Oh, they changed it. It used to be, if you hid the reference plane, then that tick mark part of the dimension string would hide. Sometimes the whole dimension, sometimes just that middle section would go away, and it would look really strange. So in this case, because part of the dimension is attached to things that aren't hidden, and part of it's attached to things that are, it leaves the whole dimension in there. We'll get to plotting in assignment J, I think. Sheets and plotting. So, those are grids, and now if I want to kind of stretch the endpoints a little bit, I can tweak that. I want these so that they're just kind of crossing past the others, so I have a nice crossing line there, intersection. And it doesn't matter if that line doesn't show intersecting with that graphically, the columns will still work. Any questions so far on grids? 4 foot 2 3/4 here on either side. But if you still have your 40 feet overall, these numbers will add up as long as you get those two outer ones correct.
When you were picking the grids, there was a little box with a check mark.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Good question. Kevin says, what about that box with a check mark? When you select the grid, the one that's checked shows there's a bubble at that end. So I can uncheck it and the bubble goes away. And so if I wanted a grid at both ends, a bubble, I mean at both ends, I can check the one at that end and do the same. So it's individually grid line by grid line that you do that. Good. Another trick I'll show you that we don't really have in this assignment, but I want you to know, is on a commercial building, a lot of times you'll have grids at kind of an even spacing, and then occasionally you have another grid that's close to another one. So let's say that this grid right here might be 1.1. So I'm going to copy that, maybe 2 feet down, and I'm going to change it to say that's grid 1.1. And if you were drawing it by hand or in AutoCAD, and you wanted to show this plan at 8 scale, and the grid bubbles are overlapping like that, you would come along and you draw that line and kind of angle it out, and then connect it and put the circle down here. Well, Revit really wants that grid line to be in space where it is, just like a level should stay at 10 feet or 12 feet or wherever it should be. But the end points, the bubbles can be offset. So if you select that grid line, see this little jagged symbol, that adds an elbow. Then I can pull that elbow down. So now you can see the full circle for 1 and 1.1, and then you can adjust where those go. But when you want to pull the bubbles over, it's still, the circle is still in line with the line. So it's kind of like saying the grid line is here in space, but we've just kind of added an offset graphically so you can read the numbers. And it's cool. I think it's, when I first started learning Revit, I thought, that's the way it should work. And it is an understanding that a datum is an absolute kind of plane in space. Levels are horizontal planes, grids are vertical planes. And so when you have two grids that intersect, that column is going to be at the intersection. It's going to go vertically up. So if I say I'm moving this grid over, it should move in all my floor plans and also in my elevations. So if I go to a west elevation view, existing west, those grids will show up in the west elevation as well. So if I say, oh, that 1.1 should be further over, go back to the plan, it's been moved on the plan as well. I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we don't need it. Well, one more thing. If you wanted to straighten it out now that it's moved, select it and just grab that elbow and pull it back in line, and it kind of clicks back into a straight grid line. Levels work the same way. Okay, so I'm going to say what I have here. And this is probably a good time to take a break. We're kind of midway through. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording. And I'll call that session 5 grids.